Okay. See. Main screen, turn on. Good evening, everyone. Unfortunately, I don't really know how long I'm going to be streaming tonight since I'm feeling pretty tired. Been pretty tired for a couple days now, but we'll see what happens. Probably just gonna draw sketches while I react to some random video. And by random, I mean I'm gonna be reacting to Lucian's video on eye guards and heard it's pretty wild how that whole fiasco ultimately turned into actually did turn into Concord 2.0. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, on the desk. That. Oh, right. One last thing. Headphones. And to forget to wear them during reactions. There. Let's get started, shall we? Yeah, my speaker actually does that every time I turn it off.
$1 million. That's how much it costs to have a game trailer be featured to the millions of people watching the yearly Game Awards ceremony. However, during the final game reveal of 2025's award show, usually the moment everyone is waiting for, we'd see the showrunner preparing us to witness a new revolutionary multiplayer game made by an independent, self-published studio. And you know what?
And we mean that in the biggest of quotation marks. Yeah, no spoiler, but let's face it, it's High Guard. You probably already learned that somewhere.
He wasn't exaggerating. In fact, the game was so revolutionary that it managed to get bombarded by negative reviews from the moment it launched, proceeded to lose over 90% of its player base within less than a week after launch, fired 80% of its staff in barely 2 weeks after launch, and shut down the entire studio as well as the game itself in less than 45 days after launch. The story of High Guard is one of utter mismanagement, blatant lies about its independent status, and uncontrollable hubris that spanned over half a decade of development. I mean, it was such a disaster that it most likely burned through tens of millions of dollars of funding, with some even theorizing that the total amount could have been over 200 million. So how did these developers that worked on nothing but industry-defining blockbusters over the years fail so miserably? And why did one of the most influential figures in gaming decide to stake his entire reputation all for the sake of peddling High Guard harder than any other game in his career? Well, as you might expect, the story is very messy and has a lot of details. So, without further ado, let's do this.
It's somehow complicated, yet at the same time jarringly simple to figure out. Yeah, it's one of those stories.
Alright, so to really understand the disaster of High Guard, we actually have to go all the way back to 1995 when the Electronic Entertainment Expo, otherwise known as E3, would launch. Back then, video games were...
Ah, yes, E3. It was basically a multi-million-dollar cringe fest, but dang it, it was our cringe fest. I will never forget all the memes it spawned. Such good memes. Sorry, just reminiscing of all the cringe of the past. Anyway, back to this.
nowhere near close to how big they are today. And this expo was mostly used to showcase to publishers and, well, business people certain aspects of the video game industry. Throughout the years that followed, though, gaming would start to become more and more profitable and mainstream. E3 would benefit from this directly, and it would become the biggest video game related event every single year in parallel to its European counterpart, which was Gamescom. It would consistently be held in the summer of every year, more specifically in the month of June. One of the biggest highlights of E3 was during the peak of the console wars, when you had PlayStation and Xbox rent out spaces a few feet away from each other as they were presenting the next generation consoles that would define gaming for the next few years. This is what E3 truly was all about. However, as you might know,
Yeah. Competition is basically everything. Sometimes the PlayStation brand just made the... Or sometimes brands just spent all the money just to show off to other brands. Oh, yeah, you showed up to a reaction to High Guard, Drebin. Actually, hold on. Gotta relaunch Axel chat real quick. Forgot it whenever I switch. Yeah, forget when. I often forget that whenever I switch the sound output, the Axel chat notifications kind of mute themselves. So, yeah. Back to this. The E3 days were just fun, the fun type of cringe. Watching companies in real time humiliate themselves for clout. You know, back before it got ruined. Forever. Don't need to explain how.
by now, all good things come to an end, and E3 unfortunately was no exception. For many people, the end of E3 was due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but in other ways, one could say that it began prior. From the day this
Yeah, let's face it, E3 was just hemorrhaging money. Its demise was just kinda inevitable. Sadly, COVID was just the final nail in the coffin.
Expo was created, the only people who had access to E3 were industry insiders or press. Regular people had no access, but E3 2019 changed that. This allowed 15,000 regular people, non-industry insiders, to buy tickets that were priced at over $100 so that they could, for the first time, join in on the fun. This showed that E3 was looking for more ways to make money. It simply wasn't sustainable to run this based purely on industry insiders. In 2020, the public passes were going to go from 15,000 to 25,000. Showing a real need of more ways to make money. However, due to the pandemic, everything came to a halt. Unlike other conventions or events,
Yeah. Shame I wasn't able to go to an E3 event in person, but let's be real here, those tickets were fucking expensive. Thankfully, the E3 events were just as much fun to watch on live streams as they were in person. Duke Nukem Forever was just kinda doomed to be a failure. Don't think that's a valid reason to really stop watching E3 for. Especially since there were better reasons to stop watching E3.
That brought their content online or remote, E3 decided to pretty much kill everything. 2020 was the only year since 1995 that had nothing to do with the Electronic Entertainment Expo. Now look, it's no secret, there are certain developers like Nintendo who've been holding their own presentations every single year since 2014. E3 shutting down in 2020 only made it more clear. Nintendo Direct is not only here to stay, it should be the primary source of Nintendo news.
Yeah, also this was basically the main reason E3 died, honestly. Why go to a massive press conference when you could spend less money holding your own event with blackjack and hookers? In fact, forget E3. Pussies got rid of the hookers.
Xbox, who would usually reserve their biggest announcements for E3, would take a page out of Nintendo's playbook, inaugurating the Xbox Games Showcase, which has been, since that year, their main way to showcase their biggest announcements. PlayStation would do the exact same thing with the State of Play. In 2021, E3 was still not held physically, but this time they held it remotely with anyone able to join. They were hoping to return to an in-person event by 2022, but those plans were also completely scrapped and there wasn't even a digital event. It was just like 2020. They were finally meant to bring back E3 physically in 2023, but due to the lack of interest by publishers who had already spent so much making their own shows, they just decided to flat out cancel it. This wasn't just the
Yeah, let's be real here. E3's death was just kind of inevitable. Nice use of the Futurama joke there. Yeah, I mean, kind of hard to make a joke about doing someone's own thing without referencing the blackjack and hookers line. Classic joke.
console makers making their own shows, you had developers making their own shows too, like EA Play, the Ubisoft conference, the Square Enix conference. E3 was essentially made redundant, and the pandemic only accelerated that. I truly think that this was where the world was headed anyway. Problem is though, now you had multiple different conferences to look forward to for different publishers and games, and that in turn left a huge vacuum for any mid-sized or indie-sized studio. Where were they meant to talk about their games? Well,
I mean, Indie Showcase and PAX were still a thing. But yeah, it's hard to stand out.
That's where Jeff Keighley comes in. Look, Jeff, when it comes to the video game industry, has been a veteran for a very long time. If you followed any gaming news or events, you must have definitely seen his face at least once, whether it be E3.
Yeah, like Dorito Gate. And yeah, everything just kind of jumped the shark after that.
Gamescom, or any high-profile gaming-related event. His story goes back decades, even though the guy for some reason never ages. He was truly able to put his name on the map when he was the only journalist who was present with Valve as they were launching Half-Life 2. Taking you behind the scenes in a studio, Valve, which is known to be quite secretive to the public. He was also involved in his fair share of controversies like the whole Dorito Gate saga, when he presented the Halo partnership with Mountain Dew and Doritos, which led to this famous picture. Fundamentally though, to Jeff, His goal has always been to give gaming what it deserves, and that's to put it on par with other creative avenues, like movies. Both his parents were executives at IMAX. This meant that he constantly attended things like the Oscars. From an early age, he wondered why video games didn't have an equivalent to the Oscars, even though they were a medium that deserved it. In 2014, he would do something ridiculous, insane even, which is creating a new award show for video games with money out of his own pocket. He refused to fundraise it because he said it would be too awkward. He wanted to put his money where his mouth was. The reason why he was insane was because throughout the years, there were many other attempts to do this. These gaming awards, none of them would really stick. But over the years...
Yeah, I remember one of them even nominated Madden 2008 as the winner. Let's see, which one was that one, actually? The award. I'm gonna have to. Okay, it was Spike Video Game Awards where they nominated Madden as the winner. Ish, no wonder they weren't around anymore. Yeah, I really need to do a reaction to Spike TV's downfall from Magic Mush. Oh yeah, back to this.
He did exactly that. It actually stuck and has now become an integral part of video games. However, as E3 shut down, he also saw another opportunity, filling the void that it left. This is when he would launch the Summer Game Fest. It took place in the same month that E3 took place in. It wasn't rocket science. It aimed to fill the exact void left over by E3's cancellation. This meant that Jeff and his
Yeah, Indie Game Fest was always a thing that I look forward to watching. Because even if I don't wind up playing any of the games there, they are really fun to find out what crazy shit individuals are able to come up with. I remember Spike for their show Deadliest Warrior. Yeah, a show that wound up being usurped by Death Battle later on. I could never catch a break. Thank you.
Production team would not only head the prestigious Game Awards in December, but would also have another event called the Summer Game Fest in the summer. Both of these events would have game reveals, and both of them would be watched by hundreds of thousands of people expecting to see games that will revolutionize the space. When it came to the Game Awards in particular, over the years it had gotten so successful with such a high consistent viewership that by 2025 it was reported that if you want to showcase a 3-minute trailer during the awards, it would cost you over $1 million, almost doubling the prices from 2024. And of course, it goes without saying, the most valuable slot in the entire award show is the final game that's shown. In show business, you always save the best for last. You want people to keep watching. And so, this is why it was so shocking to the world that for the Game Awards 2025, with such high prices, the game deemed most valuable in the entire show, the one shown at the end, would be something they had never heard of before, High Guard. And this is how it would be presented. Take a look for yourself.
You know, sometimes our last reveal at the Game Awards is a teaser for something years and years away. Not tonight. Our final world premiere comes from 61 members of the team that built Apex Legends and Titanfall. 4 years ago, the principals founded a new independent studio with the hopes of pushing the shooter genre forward with a new original game. They've done it in complete secrecy, which is even more amazing because the game is very deep into development. The power of independent, self-published studios to push this medium forward is a growing and I think positive theme in our industry. And so tonight, you're not only going to get the announcement of the game, but also your first look at the gameplay. I've played it, and after you see this trailer, I think you're going to want to as well. Welcome to High Guard.
Yeah, 1,200 likes on the video.
Yeah, I remember watching the original reveal with Ray that same year. We both came to the conclusion that it looked like AI-generated slop. Mainly in terms of us not even understanding what we're looking at. Yeah, that's usually what everyone agreed with. Titanfall 2 being the better game. Then, of course, Apex Legends kind of took thunder. And now we're here. feel like Titanfall L2 is the Lufia 2 of military shooters. Or cyberpunk shooters. I don't know. But, yeah. Honestly, this game should have just been second to last. You know, have maybe swap this game slot with the Mega Man trailer, and I don't think the backlash wouldn't have been that severe.
17,000 dislikes. Now, I'm not going to show you the gameplay just yet. You need even more context to understand just how ridiculous everything he said truly was. Prior to this Game Awards show, Jeff would tweet coordinates, okay, on Twitter, just randomly, that would lead you to this weird statue in the middle of the Mojave Desert. It was an enigma. For weeks, people had no idea what it was. This was the main mystery of the Game Awards, and that game ended up being none other than Divinity, made by Larian Studios, the same people who made Baldur's Gate 3. To many, this was the biggest game of the Game Awards. This was meant to be the final game to be shown, right? The biggest event of that day. Instead, what people got was a game they never heard of before, that looked fairly generic, that didn't really seem to make it clear what it was about. Jeff had hyped this up like a revolutionary title, but it looked like any other game you could find on Steam right now.
Pretty crazy, that's right. High Guard launches in just 7 weeks on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. It is insanely fun to see, fun to play, as you saw in that trailer. And now it's time for our final award. Last year, Astrobot.
So there it was, the biggest game of this prestigious award show, coming out in 7 weeks and seemingly out of nowhere. So as you would expect, people put on their investigative fedoras to determine where this independent, self-publishing developer, as Jeff described it, came from. And that investigation would only lead to more confusion and suspicion. You see, the studio behind Highguard, Wildlight Entertainment, made their first announcement to the public that they exist back in the beginning of 2023. Here we can see the design and creative director of Wildlight making a tweet saying, "What have I been up to over the last year anyway? Working hard on a game with amazing people who I trust very much. Today we announce Wildlight Entertainment, our new studio. I've never been happier, prouder, and hyped for the game we're working on." As we can see in his Twitter bio, he had worked on Apex Legends, Titanfall 1 and 2, Modern Warfare 2, and Call of Duty World at War, to name a few. So these are very well-regarded games in the industry. This is when the studio would also create its Twitter account saying, "Hello world. We're very excited today to announce our new game studio, Wildlight Entertainment. We've got big dreams of creating an epic shooter IP." And here we can see a Zoom call of 22 different staff members that were working at that studio as early as 2023. It wouldn't even take a day for game publications to start reporting on this. Former Apex Legends, Titanfall developers create new studio, Wildlight Entertainment. The studio head would be Chad, someone who was at Respawn Entertainment for around 11 years. He was also the ex-game director for Apex Legends, a game that had, well, made a lot of money. So no wonder many publications were talking about it. You have a bunch of ex-Infinity Ward and ex-Respawn Entertainment developers that made their studios a lot of money, now forming their own. And so far, other than this very limited array of information we have from 2023, the only other thing we knew was from Jeff Keighley himself, calling it a self-published independent studio. Even though their own company LinkedIn page as early as 2023 would say Wildlight Entertainment is a new, fully funded entertainment studio. Never really.
Foreshadowing is a literary device. Yeah, okay, I know. Oh, hey, Raymond.
Specifying where they got their money from. In fact, what I find interesting is that the website linked on their LinkedIn is wildlightentertainment.com. And when you go there, it says, "We're under construction. Please check back for an update soon." It's not even wildlight.gg, which actually works. But this little piece of mismanagement aside, Wildlight was about to face a world of hurt that they could have never predicted after their reveal at the Game Awards. You see, back in 2024, Sony launched Concord, a multiplayer shooter that was meant to be live service that cost over $400 million and that was such a disastrous flop, it shut down in under 2 weeks. I mean, it resulted in a studio that Sony had bought to shut down immediately afterwards. This made many people ask the question, who asked for this game to begin with? Ever since then, whenever someone comes out with a newly announced live service multiplayer game, they're placed under 1,000 times more scrutiny due to this. And while I'm
Yeah. You gotta remember, live service games are a massive gamble. You either make the most successful game of all time, or you make one of the bigger flops of all time. There's no in between. And as we're going to see later, your success better be maintained.
sure the Highguard developers, after working in secrecy for so long, were so excited about the Game Awards reveal, what they could have probably never expected is that people were making direct comparisons of their game to Concord, the worst thing you can ever hope to happen in this
Yeah,
game.
exactly, like movies.
Based on this uninspired generic gameplay they showed during the Game Awards, even with Jeff's insane hype towards it, it seemed like it was going to be nothing more than a Concord 2.0, any developer's worst nightmare. But you know what didn't help at all? Highguard's social media page would tweet almost immediately after the trailer would come out during the Game Awards, saying, "What a night! We'd like to extend a big thank you to Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards. We have so much in store for you when the game launches on January 26th, and can't wait to welcome everyone into the world of Highguard. We'll see you next year, Wardens." Okay, this is a post you would expect them to make after the big reveal, sure. You know what else you would expect though? Them continuing to tweet up until release day. Except they didn't. They literally disappeared, to the point where many gaming publications, including...
Okay, immediate problem number one. Yeah, if you're basically making a... Yeah, you can't exactly shadow drop a game if you already have a massive trailer out. That's literally the opposite of shadow dropping. Furthermore, once you get everyone's attention, it's your damn job to start to keep posting. I know it's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of negativity surrounding the game, but that's kind of what you get for releasing a... That's kind of what happens when you announce something that you basically appeal to a lot of people. They're gonna get audiences who are not really... who are basically either children or not emotionally stable. To put it mildly. And it's also one of the main reasons why having a PR person on Twitter could be absolutely important for games like this. Well, freaking larger companies know this.
Forbes would start making articles about how they went MIA right after the Game Awards. No new videos on their YouTube page, no new tweets on their Twitter account, nothing. Radio silence, and the game was meant to come out 3 weeks from then. This article was written on January 6th. The game was going to come out in 20 days. 6 days later, Paul Tassi from Forbes would write another article on January 12th titled The High Guard Mystery. 2 weeks to launch in complete silence. Now look, to be fair, this could have been a genius marketing move. Everyone was talking about this game, saying how they probably closed down or declared bankruptcy right before launch. However, in my opinion, you'd be naive to think that there's no such thing as bad publicity all the time. No, there are exceptions. This isn't the Wolf of Wall Street. When your game is...
Yeah, no such thing as bad publicity is a massive logical fallacy. Sometimes bad publicity can, in fact, be absolutely terrible.
being called by so many people Concord 2, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy unless you're there to stop it. Highguard wasn't there to stop it. In fact, a new theory is popping up now, the fact that they weren't even going to release anymore. And just as you thought that things couldn't get worse so shortly before the game was meant to launch, things got even weirder. The senior writer of Gaming and Tech at VentureBeat, Imran Khan, would come out with the news. Highguard did not pay a single penny to be featured in the most valuable spot in the Game Awards spotlight. That's right, the same Game Awards that charges $1 million for 3 minutes gave its most valuable spot during the entire show for free. On January 17th, 2026, 9 days before the game was meant to come out, Forbes would also confirm this, citing 2 separate sources that reached out, confirming, yes, they didn't pay a single penny. Jeff just really liked the game and offered it to them. So there we were, 9 days away from release, and this bombshell dropped. Is this Concord 2.0? Did they go bankrupt before the game even releases? And why the hell did Jeff give his most popular spot in the show to this very generic looking game? The gaming community was truly...
I mean, they were kind of right on the money for the second question, not gonna lie.
Baffled at something that had never really occurred before. And just as the discourse was running rampant on every piece of social media you can imagine, something completely unexpected ended up happening. And that's Highguard finally breaking their silence barely 3 days before release. On January 22nd, 2026, Jeff Keighley would tweet, "Just 4 days until the launch of Highguard on Monday on Steam and consoles." Bear in mind, up until this point, Highguard had said nothing since the Game Awards reveal. Jeff was single-handedly carrying this game's entire marketing, and many of the comments are pretty much saying this. Paul Tassi, the same guy who wrote those Forbes articles, would literally say, "Have you heard anything? Like, is the developer still here? Did they not go bankrupt?" And it would only be on January 23rd, 2026 that Highguard would finally make some sort of social media announcement, 3 days before their release, saying, "Tune in on Monday, January 26th at 10 a.m. PT for the Highguard launch showcase. Here, we'll share an in-depth look at Highguard direct from the studio, featuring a full gameplay deep dive, year 1 plans, and much more." As you can imagine, many of the comments were roasting them, grilling them, with some acknowledging that this might have just been a very good marketing strategy. The Highguard account would then begin a countdown, posting every day up until release, saying 1 day remains. And you know what? Looking at some of these 420 replies, there was some excitement brewing. You know, people were very curious to see, why was Jeff talking about this game so much? And God, talking about it was an understatement. The guy couldn't stop talking, as if they held his family hostage. On January 23rd, he would just tweet this image randomly, saying, "Highguard, January 26th at 10 a.m. PST, signaling when it would release." Someone in the replies would say, "Thanks, Jeff," to which Jeff would say, "See you online. It's a special one." The next day, he'd post a badge saying, "I first went hands-on last summer and had so much fun with Highguard. Now it's your turn on Monday. Curious what everyone thinks." On that same day, he would post a GIF saying, "In 48 hours, I'll be accepting your apologies, so when Highguard comes out." On January 26th, when the game would come out, he'd post a screen cap.
That one didn't age quite so well.
The title was, Highguard isn't dead on arrival. In fact, after 4 hours, I'm convinced it's one of the best new shooters in years. This didn't really mean much though, because Polygon thought Dragon Age the Veilguard was actually good, along with Concord. 1 minute later, after that Polygon post, he would make another post with 4 different images of the game saying screenshot.
I mean, yeah, but Polygon, it's kind of Polygon's job to be wrong about everything. Let's be real here. They're like the slightly more professional Kotaku.
From Highguard, now live and free. Look, I think you get the point I'm trying to make here. This guy was tweeting and talking about this game more than their official account. And when I say this guy, I mean one of, if not the most influential voice in video gaming. For some reason, he decided to stake his entire reputation on this game being a success, being fun, being good. So much so that he gave it his most...
You played Veilguard. It sucked in his opinion. Yeah, I hear it ultimately did suck. So there actually was a bit of an explanation as to why it sucked. Apparently the team were under the impression that they were making a live service until the very last moment. And then the story was ultimately forced to... And then, of course, there was the whole teams clashing over the tone of the story. Yeah, the development was just a mess, is what I'm saying.
Valuable spot in his show. At this point, there was 3 possibilities. He had a financial stake in this game, his family was being held hostage by Highguard devs, or he just genuinely wanted to help. Regardless of those possibilities though, he just staked his entire reputation on this game, and that meant something. Some of the biggest streamers and content creators would check out this game as soon as it would release. Yes, of course some would be sponsored, that was Highguard's social media strategy, similarly to Apex Legends, we'll get more into that later, but let's not pretend that they wouldn't have played it anyway, because god, the curiosity would kill you. Why is this guy who's so influential in the video game industry staking everything for it? It must be good, right? Well actually it was, dude, it was fucking mid. The trailer turned out to actually do it a lot of justice. It was generic as hell. Jeff's efforts would make it so that the game had 100,000 concurrent players on release. That's a crazy number. However, even Jeff's endless marketing wouldn't prove good enough if your game just doesn't cut it, and it didn't. The player count would fall off very quickly. Almost a day after the game would come out, Jeff would tweet, "Thoughts on Highguard so far?" This tweet has over 7.5 million views, 5,900 replies. It was safe to say that he didn't really get the response he was looking for. I'm sure he was hoping for, Jeff, you were right. Sorry, you proved me wrong. But instead, he got the absolute opposite. And of course, one of the biggest questions being asked at the time was, why did he shill this game so damn hard knowing that it's nothing special? Someone would at Jeff saying, "Hey Jeff, I was wondering if you financially backed Highguard during development or own some percentage of the company. Obviously you don't have to answer, just curious if you have any incentive with Wildlight Entertainment if they hit certain earning thresholds." To which he would reply with, "Lol, absolutely not." This meant
well,
the 3 possibilities
not
earlier,
Wildcard anyway.
Either Highguard developers held his family hostage, or he genuinely was just trying to help. Well, as I mentioned, even his help wouldn't be enough if the game wasn't up to par. On Steam, the game would open up with overwhelmingly negative reviews, with only 17% of them being positive. The main complaints were poor performance, uninspired art direction, and just tedious gameplay. Look, if I had to explain to you the purpose of a game, like let's say Call of Duty or Apex Legends, it would take me 10 seconds. Like for example, in Apex Legends you have multiple operators, each with different abilities. You land on a big map and your goal is to loot gear to survive, hunting down other players and being the last team to live. done? Yeah, well, just to explain the gameplay loop of Highguard, GameSpot made a YouTube short. This was them trying to explain it as fast and simply as possible. You want to know how long the short is? 1 minute, 48 seconds. They needed almost 2 minutes to explain to you the gameplay loop of Highguard. That already says a lot to the complexity and tediousness of this game.
Yeah, why do I get the feeling this is gonna... The explanation is gonna sound like Spanafashan's battle mechanics. Overly obtuse and no idea. None of it retains, the info retains.
Look, overall, it doesn't take a genius to understand from their trailer. You had multiple wardens, characters you could play with different abilities. You and your team would also vote on a base. There was multiple types of bases that you could start with. The whole point of this game was to fortify your base and attack the other base. You had to find a sword on a map which would allow you to destroy the shield of the enemy base, and then you'd be the attacker, they'd be the defender. And in order to win, you'd have to destroy multiple things in that base of theirs, their generators, their power, etc., etc. That's it really in an utter nutshell. Now look, in theory, this might sound...
Build your base, destroy their base. Done. Literally all you needed to say to explain the game.
Sound fun, but there were some things that just didn't really make much sense that really added to the tediousness. This map was absolutely massive, and yet it was only 3v3. That to many people didn't make much sense. These aspects of tediousness as well as uninspired gun gameplay, coupled with the fact that everything looked generic, a McDonald's type of art direction, as you might say, like as if you bought
Discount Fortnite. Bing.
a bunch of different assets from a marketplace, gave the impression to many people that this was some sort of a Frankenstein game. Like, they just took a bunch of different things they developed over a couple of years and just shipped it together just to get something out for people to play. And even though the game was free, the game was bleeding players like it had been struck in an artery. As of now, even game journalists found this game to be lacking, uninspiring, giving it a 63 out of 100 Metacritic score, but the real pain came from the players, 2.6 out of 10 from almost 300 user ratings. Steam currently has over 30,000 reviews, and it's sitting on mixed, with only 46% of them having something positive to say. The day after release, Jeff would acknowledge that things weren't going that well for him. He'd jokingly say, "Opening X this morning," while linking an image of Flynn Rider from Tangled surrounded by many different swords. This tweet would again gain a lot of exposure, 5 million views, 47,000 likes, 2,000 replies. And again, as you might imagine, a lot of them were not positive. Many people in the industry would take notice of this, and some would choose to speak out against it. You'd have the vice president and co-founder of Epic Games say, "It's downright horrible," referring to all the hate this new game was getting. Especially a free game from a new studio. Just so sad. This is a hobby for people they should approach with joy, not hatred. Of course, many of these 200 replies would not have positive things to say. One of the tweets on this topic that will get the most attention would be from Sven Vinke, the studio head of Larian, the creators behind Baldur's Gate 3, saying, "I don't like people shitting on things others have created. Putting something out into the world makes you vulnerable, and that alone deserves respect, even if you dislike the creation. It's easy to destroy things, it's a lot harder to build them. The best critics understand this. Even when they're being critical, they do their best not to be hurtful." Again, as you might expect, the top replies, the most liked ones at least, were not in agreement with him. In just one day, Highguard would lose half its player count. Another day would pass by, they would lose yet another 50% of their player count. It seemed like with every passing day, thousands of players were leaving. But hey, it seemed like they weren't going to let that get in the way of their plans. Shortly after the game would come out, they would tweet, "Here's a look at the Highguard Year 1 game plan. Episode 2 arrives in 2 weeks. Each episode is 2 months long. Content shown is free for all players." And they would have plans up until December 2026. Every 2 months, you'd have a new warden, a new character to play. Every 4 months, you'd have a new map. Ranked mode was coming soon. You'd have new weapons, new raid tools, new limited time game modes. I mean, it seemed like they had things figured out. It seemed like they were here for the long run, regardless.
Yeah, As we all know from Anthem, things never go to plan.
Regardless if players were leaving or not. It also seemed like they were very open for feedback and weren't afraid to try new things. On January 30th, the #1 marketer of this game, Jeff Keighley, would tweet out, "Highguard has added a 5v5 raid mode to the game, playable today." Now, did that help with player retention? Yes, a few thousands would play, realize that the game just wasn't for them, like definitively, and then it would proceed to lose many more players, reaching below 10,000 on the 3rd of February, and only dwindling more since then. By February 12th, the game would be down to 3,100 players on Steam, and with every passing day they kept losing hundreds more. Even with their one-year planning strategy and their willingness to accept feedback, it seemed like the Conqueror 2 prophecy was coming true no matter how hard they tried to fight it. This would be directly confirmed to us because in barely just 2 weeks after the launch of the game, the majority, not just a small chunk, the majority of the employees working at Wildlight Entertainment would get laid off.
Oh, there's a
On February
fucking
12th,
surprise.
2026, when the game was down to a mere 3,000 players on Steam and no doubt a few thousand on consoles as well, the Twitter account Shinobi602 would tweet out, "Highguard developer Wildlight Entertainment has seemingly laid off most of its staff," quoting a LinkedIn post from an employee in which they said, "Unfortunately, along with most of the team at Wildlight, I was laid off today." The LinkedIn post would go deeper, saying, "This one really stings as there was a lot of unreleased content I was really looking forward to that I and others designed for Highguard." This person in particular was a senior level designer with 7 years of experience in the AAA game space. It has now been 3 weeks, and as far as I could tell from his profile, he's still looking for a job. Around the same time, another employee would make a Twitter article titled "Reflecting on Shipping My First Game, Highguard." This post would prove to be a disaster. The developer in question would get brigaded and
to say the
bombarded with
least.
some very harsh words, turning a very bad situation even uglier. And it would mainly be due to a couple of paragraphs that I'll read out to you and, well, you can make up your own mind. He'd say that the game had unbiased internal pre-reveal feedback, and it was quite positive. When it was negative, it was constructive and often actionable, indicating that there was, as far as they were concerned, nothing wrong with the game. He'd then continue, but then the trailer came out, and it was all downhill from there. Content creators love to point out the bias in folks who give positive reviews after being flown out for an event, but ignore the fact that when their negative-leaning content gets 10 times the engagement of the positive, they've got just as much incentive to lean into a disingenuous direction, whether consciously or not. The hate started immediately. In addition to
Yeah, that's a fucking lie. I can tell you right now that the quote-unquote hate brigades don't... When a popular game gets hated, it's not really because of a bunch of people going around saying, "What can we hate today?" Hey, no matter how many people want to construe that to be the case, I can tell you right now, the Titanic was already sank, know what, and it was a one-off deal. That shit isn't really anything that happens anymore.
dogpiling on the trailer, I personally came under fire due to my naivete on Twitter, which almost all of my now former coworkers had learned to avoid during their previous game launches, he explained. After setting my Twitter account to private to protect my sanity, many content creators made videos and posts about me and my cowardice, amassing millions of views and inadvertently sending hundreds of angry gamers into my replies. They laughed at me for being part of the game,
this shit
told me
ain't
to get
gonna
out my
help.
McDonald's applications, and mocked me for listing having autism in my bio, which they seemed to think was evidence the game would be woke trash. All of this was very emotionally taxing. He would then acknowledge that there's much constructive criticism about the trailer, marketing, and launch, but also isn't sure if things would have been better had the game not been announced at the Game Awards. He would then say, "We were turned into a joke from minute one, largely due to the false assumptions about $1 million ad placement, which even prominent journalists soon began to state as fact. Within minutes, it was decided. This game was dead on arrival, and creators had free rage bait content for a month. Every one of our videos on social media got downvoted to hell. Comment sections were flooded with copy-paste meme phrases such as Concord 2 and Titanfall 3 died for this."
I mean, having a game that looks like AI slop will kind of do that, dude. Oh, also, hey, official Dizzed. Am I pronouncing that right?
Launch, we received over 14,000 review bombs from users with less than an hour of playtime. Many didn't even finish the required tutorial. He'd finished.
Okay. Yeah, here's another tangent from me. How the fuck did you say didn't even finish the required tutorial and not see that as a problem? I'm gonna be blunt. Nobody likes tutorials. Hell, TF2 has a sucky tutorial. And yet, very few people ever complained about it because no one ever really played it. In fact, I bet half of people who play TF2 don't even know there was a tutorial. So much for self-reflection.
This by saying, "If this pattern continues, all that will be left are corporations, at least in the multiplayer space. Innovation is on life support. Even if Highguard had a rock."
Yeah, I know for a fact that's not true. Hell, I actually played a multiplayer indie game with Ray earlier. Buckshot Roulette multiplayer mode. It is a shockingly fun experience. And that's not even going into the numerous multiplayer games that actually are indie.
Launch are independent, self-published, dev-led studio full of passionate people just trying to make a fun game with zero AI and zero corporate oversight deserved better than this. We deserve the bare minimum of not having our downfall be
No one deserves anything, dude.
manifested. Barely a couple of days after this article would come out on Twitter, this developer would end up deleting his account. For many of his loudest haters, this article he wrote was nothing more than him playing the victim. Blaming gamers, blaming content creators, blaming pretty much anyone except maybe himself and the game developers that made this game that...
Oh, yeah, also, the whole indie aspect. Yeah, about that. Actually, wait, I think this documentary is gonna go over it, but when you find out about that aspect, you're gonna be even more pissed at this thing than you were originally. In fact, a lot of critics say... In fact, a lot of critics and game devs alike who read this actually called this person out. One of which actually worked on a Battle Royale game that never took off.
Seemingly no one asked for. On the other hand, though, one can understand his frustration. He had worked for almost 3 years on a game, finally revealed it, and within the span of a month, his whole life fell apart. I don't know what he was hoping to do with this article, but, you know, in the end, as we can see, his account was gone. But that was the least of his worries and the least of many other people's worries when it came to HighGuard. That's because barely a day after the mass layoffs would happen, HighGuard's website, when you'd go to it, would say, "Site unavailable. This site is currently unavailable. Please contact some email for assistance." Under that, you would see a link to their Discord server and their Twitter profile. Now, the Twitter link worked. The Discord link, on the other hand, did not. In fact, when you would click on it, it would redirect you to a completely different and unrelated Discord server by the name of HighGuard Gaming Guild. This had nothing to do with the game. It was just called HighGuard. They didn't even bother posting.
Ah, dang. That's just a cherry on the shit sundae. Right there. The little things.
Posting the right server in that link. Additionally, as this was all happening, HighGuard couldn't even be found as a YouTube category anymore. Usually when you upload a video of a game, you can very easily label it. Let's say League of Legends or Call of Duty. HighGuard had a category, but it was removed. And during all this, someone would ask in the correct HighGuard Discord server, what's up with the website being updated? And someone from the HighGuard team would say, not sure on the time frame, but basically it needs to be transferred and simplified. Low priority at the moment, reputational damage already done. Now we just need to focus on delivering updates and content to improve. Now look, I already know what you're thinking. Mugen, this is a catastrophe. This is a disaster. What the hell is happening? Oh yeah, it is. You're completely right about that. But here's the thing. It's about to get a million times worse. Remember how Jeff had introduced HighGuard's
there we go.
Here are his exact words. This is how he described them.
The power of independent, self-published studios to push the
independent, self-published studios. Earlier than this, during this clip, he would also call them independent, indie. Hell, even the employee who had written that article before deleting his account would refer to them the same exact way, independent, self-published studio. We were under the impression this studio was independent, self-funded. This is what everyone was saying. However, on February 17th, 2026, the same day their website would go down, the games journalist Stefan Totillo would drop a bombshell saying, sources, Tencent secretly funded struggling shooter HighGuard. Why?
So that was a fucking lie. Yeah, that was the most infuriating plot twist of all time. Right there. This game wasn't even indie. It was about as indie as Destiny 2 was fun. The joke is that it wasn't. Damn it. It's clear.
Light Entertainment has said for years it was fully funded, but not shared detail. Stephen's article would go into specifics, saying that it wasn't Tencent, the Chinese entity that directly funded them. It was done through a subsidiary, Timmy, saying sources familiar with the Tencent Wildlight connection said that Tencent studio group Timmy was the group backing Wildlight. They did not specify to GameFile the reason for the secrecy about the agreement, nor did they share the scale. It's unclear if or when the funding ended and how that relates to last week's layoffs. Wildlight has been technically independent and not part of Timmy. Timmy/Tencent are massive players in gaming, and yes, they are. I've mentioned them on this channel already. One can't forget that Tencent Games owns Honor of Kings, the highest grossing mobile game of all time ever in the history of humanity, sitting at $18.6 billion, making even more money than Candy Crush Saga. Let's also not forget that they own 40% of Epic Games as well as 100% of Riot Games, the creators of League of Legends. This of course dealt an even bigger blow to Highguard's already dwindling reputation that was down in the gutter. People felt like they were lying about their whole independent self-published status. And while we don't have a specific number as to how much Tencent could have funded the studio with, some people have been floating around the idea that it was over $200 million. And saying that the studio was technically founded in 2021, announced in 2023, and had its first game launched in 2026, those many years of development could very easily span tens of millions of dollars. But look, Highguard was already in the shitter, okay? They had laid off most of their staff. I mean, come on, this was going to be dead. This was truly going to be Concord 2. The person suffering from this Tencent connection was Jeff Keighley. Now, there was a conspiracy. Maybe Jeff wasn't doing this because his family was held hostage or out of the goodness of his heart. There was again a third possibility in the mix. He was doing this for real financial incentive because Tencent and Jeff Keighley maintain a long-standing strategic partnership focused on expanding the global reach of the Game Awards and other gaming events. Since 2016, this collaboration has facilitated the show's distribution in China. And one can see that the senior vice president of Tencent, Xiaoyi Ma, is sitting on the advisory board of the Game Awards. So by February 19th, Jeff's posts on Twitter, in which he would talk about things unrelated to Highguard, would have questions about this. Are you secretly funded by Tencent? Were you pressured by Tencent to make these posts about Highguard? What's going on exactly? This studio is about to completely close its doors. The game was very mid. You must have been lying that you had fun, right? But still, layoffs aside, Tencent aside, flop and impending doom aside, Highguard would continue to patch and update the game, releasing multiple updates, one on February 19th, as well as one on February 26th, releasing new game modes, new weapon balance patches. And while that was admirable, by February 26th, the game was down to 611 players.
Yeah, many people kind of complained because having all that content in a short amount of time ultimately means that the game was just withholding a lot of content, which, let's be real here, is just a common thing for live services to do.
On Steam. In exactly 1 month since release, the game had gone from 100,000 players to 611 players. The majority had left and no one was coming back. At this point, the writing was on the wall. It was clear as day. This studio, this game, they weren't going to last. And so on March 3rd, 2026, the official Highguard account would post an article saying, "Highguard's final update arriving soon. Thank you for playing with us." In which they would say, more specifically, "Today we're sharing difficult news. We have made the decision to permanently shut down Highguard on March 12th. Since launch, more than 2 million players stepped into Highguard's world. You shared feedback, created content, and many believed in what we were building. For that, we are deeply grateful." They would then go on to say, "The team is excited to release one final game update to enjoy in the remaining life of the game. We'll be adding a new warden, a new weapon, account level progression, and skill trees. Full patch notes are coming, and we're targeting tonight or tomorrow morning for patch release. From all of us at Wildlight, thank you for playing, for supporting us, and for being part of Highguard's story." This article would have over 8 million views, 4,100 replies. And while some were disappointed or shocked that this had happened, many were expecting it, maybe even gloating about it. From the get-go, this game was nothing more than a self-fulfilling prophecy of being Concord 2, and they had just shut down in under 2 months. But how did this even happen? How do you get the backing of Jeff Keighley? How do you get the most prestigious slot in the Game Awards show with over 1 million viewers? How do you get financial backing from one of, if not the biggest gaming company in the world? How do you get very talented developers that worked on nothing but blockbuster games and still managed to fail so miserably? Well, now we know, and it's even messier than we could have ever imagined. Respawn Entertainment.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to miss, but veterans of the industry aren't always going to be able to keep churning out hits. Well, I remember a pandemic of this occurred on Kickstarter when it was first gaining prominence. Yeah, we should have seen that as foreshadowing.
At a studio owned by EA. Their first breakout hit was Titanfall, releasing in 2014 and garnering many positive reviews. I personally loved playing it when it came out. It was really, really cool and innovative. Some years would pass by, and they would then release Titanfall 2. This game was not only well received for its multiplayer aspect, but it had something the first game didn't, a single-player campaign. And that was absolutely loved by so many. And even though people were expecting them to maybe work on Titanfall 3, they ended up doing something very unexpected. Shadow dropping a game in 2019 with zero marketing, zero announcement, just saying, hey, it's out, called Apex Legends, a battle royale game that garnered a lot of success. The late co-founder of Respawn Entertainment would tweet out, "I'm so overwhelmed right now. Play Apex broke 1 million unique players in under 8 hours. And after the first day would pass by, it would have reached 2.5 million players. This is a game that had zero marketing. To many, this is how a game should launch from now on. All games should launch like this. Like, yo, we just dropped this game, play it. No announcements months prior or years prior. This was genius, and it was free. So it's no surprise that in just a few years, by 2024, this game would have made over $3.4 billion. And again, I really have to emphasize this game had no marketing. Grand Theft Auto 5 had spent $100 million on marketing alone. So of course, everyone in the gaming industry wanted to know, how did you guys do this? How did this surprise launch even come to be? When did you even start working on this game? And this is what one of the developers would say. The way we work is by finding the fun. We don't have a game director who sits down and writes up a 500-page Bible. We're like a really poorly trained dog on a walk. We just kind of sniff around, let's follow our nose wherever we go, whatever's fun, we'll go a bit deeper, rub our nose in it, roll around in that a little bit. So this had happened in mid-2017 after the post-launch support for Titanfall 2 would end. They didn't really know what to do, and they just started messing with prototypes. Some of the developers at the time were interested in making a battle royale game. They would put together some prototypes, and very quickly it became very fun. And the rest is history. And so by the time Apex Legends had made billions of dollars, some people at Respawn felt, you know what? We could do this again, but this time on our own terms, and would leave to create Wildlight Entertainment. In fact, here was their...
Well, on Tencent's terms anyways. Yeah, they were very strict terms.
Exact reasoning from a Bloomberg article. Back in January 2026, Dusty Welch, the co-founder and CEO of Wildlight Entertainment, would tell Bloomberg, yeah, we left Respawn because things were getting a bit too locked up. There was no more freedom. We couldn't just do whatever we wanted like we used to. However, in this article from the end of February 2026, we'd see another reason. One could say the main reason. It would say, in 2019, they had released Apex Legends, a battle royale shooter in which dozens of players fight across a giant map. The game proved to be a massive success, generating more than $3 billion in revenue. Yet as sales piled up, some of the creatives who'd worked on it felt unhappy that they weren't benefiting enough from the resulting windfall. According to people familiar with what happened, who asked not to be identified.
Well, you can take the devs out of EA, but you can't take the EA out of the devs, I suppose. It's always corporate greed.
Discussing non-public information. The Wildlight founders decided to do things differently. One of their plans was to set up a profit-sharing program so that if the studio did deliver another big success, everyone would benefit. An enticing setup that ultimately helped Welch and his co-founders.
Wow, that plan got a lot more sinister when you remember how quickly the layoffs happened. Hey, Jesus Christ, this was doomed to fail. EA can burn for a lot of things. Including Double Helix.
Attract many of their former Respawn colleagues to the new company. Armed with a significant amount of funding from Tencent Holdings Ltd, Wildlight began hiring employees and making plans for its first game. The founders knew they wanted to make another multiplayer shooter, but they hoped to avoid the crowded battle royale market. So instead, they looked to Rust, a survival game in which players can raid enemy bases and build their own. They began constructing levels and designing mechanics for what was envisioned as a survival-focused shooter. 2 years into development, the team realized that the design wasn't working, in part because the amount of freedom conflicted with their goals for highly competitive play, according to people familiar with the events. Also, the scope was too big. Still, some parts were salvageable. The base raiding aspect of the survival game in particular seemed worth keeping. In January 2024, the team pivoted to what would become Highguard, a raid shooter that streamlined many of the survival aspects into a faster, more competitive game. So this is kind of starting to make more sense, right? The idea of why the game felt like you were playing this Frankenstein creation of multiple aspects mashed up together. Look, the dog sniffing phase that Respawn Entertainment used is very important. Let's not forget that Call of Duty Zombies was made by just a few people messing around in the office. But you also need a proper scope. You can't just do whatever you want, however you want, with unlimited money. They had also failed to understand what made Rust.
Yeah, it's kind of easy to forget this nowadays, but Rare was also guilty of this exact tactic. They would bounce a shit ton of ideas around in their head before finally just deciding on something entirely different once they get to developing it. It worked. They lucked out with their golden years at Nintendo, i.e. the Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, but yeah, it did not work as well as they'd like to think it did. And ultimately, that habit just kind of wound up killing the company. Mostly.
Special. Base rating was intense because of what was at stake. You couldn't rush it down to under an hour. The same feelings wouldn't be there. It would just be tedious. They had essentially made a game with no demographic. If you wanted base building, you'd play Rust. If you wanted Battle Royale, you'd play Apex Legends. One really interesting thing the Bloomberg article would also mention was when asked what they thought went wrong, several
Colonial Marines was Sega. And it was also created by the Borderlands team. Forgot their name. I only know Randy Pitch worked from that team, so Gearbox Software, yeah, Gearbox Software. Also, Gearbox. Also, it was practically confirmed that Gearbox used Colonial Marines as a laundering scheme for their Borderlands games. Not long enough for me, sadly. I'm not sure how you even know of Colonial Marines without even without knowing it was made by Gearbox. It was kind of weird.
Former Wildlight developers used the word hubris, a belief by the company's leadership that they could emulate what had worked in the past with Apex Legends. No matter how much the gaming landscape had changed since then, after all, they'd made one of the last decade's biggest hits. This hubris stemmed from the fact that they were so confident this game was good, they were going to shadow drop it again, just like Apex Legends, knowing that the game could hold up for itself. However, after Jeff Keighley had played during their play,
yeah, you can't shadow drop over a hyped game. That's not how that works.
playtest, he approached the development team. He approached the co-founder, who was his friend, and told them, hey, I love the game. I want to highlight it during the Game Awards since you guys are an independent studio. The co-founder would say he came into the studio and played the game, I think, twice, and he said, guys, can I propose to you? I want to do something that's unique. I want to put it in this spot and kind of do something different and bring this to the world. Welch would say, and that wasn't our plan, but like, are we going to turn down the exposure? Who would turn that down? And then you'd have
you
Chad
already
Grenier
didn't
chime
turn
in
down
too,
Tencent
ex-creative
money.
Director of Apex Legends and the head of the studio of Wildlight, saying, so we rushed a trailer together. I wish the reception had been better, but in hindsight, we made a trailer to entertain really quickly and didn't show the gameplay loop and was different and unique. They would then take the exact same approach as Apex Legends. No real marketing until release, and then a massive social media campaign with influencers, streamers, content creators, you name it. Problem is though, during the silence and during the time in which people were calling this game Concord 2.0, the morale of the team was hit pretty badly. They couldn't say anything and they were watching people pretty much tear into something.
Actually, from what I hear, the morality tanking came a month before that occurred. That should have been a massive warning sign. It's easy to miss, though, so... I won't give him too much flack for missing it.
They've worked on for 3 years. Barely a month after the game had come out, the layoffs would begin. It would be held online on a Zoom call since the studio worked remotely, and they'd pretty much announce, yeah, the funding was entirely pulled from the studio. The 100-person team had over 80% of it laid off that same day. By the time Eurogamer's report on February 27, 2026 would come out, there were less than 20.
Yeah, this game had a profit-sharing plan, by the way. Just want to remind you all of that.
People still working at the studio, doing their best to release updates before the eventual shutdown on March 12th. On March 3rd, Highguard would announce to the world that it was shutting down on March 12th, and shortly after that, you would start seeing way more posts posted on LinkedIn from previous workers at Wildlight talking about the fact that this game was shutting down and how, well, they were looking for a job. Saying things like, we swung for the fences in a saturated market and made something genuinely new that we loved to play. Even the studio head, Chad Grenier, would make a post starting it off with, Highguard didn't need to become the next Apex-sized hit to succeed. We weren't chasing that scale. What we needed
So yeah, that was also a fucking lie.
was a smaller but stable and sustainable player base, and ultimately we weren't able to find it. That's interesting because I would argue a smaller but stable and sustainable player base would be around maybe 2,000 players, a few thousands, let's say. But let's remember that by the time they had reached 2,000 or so players on Steam, they conducted the mass layoffs. That's without counting the players on consoles. So this really begs the question, what was the studio even hoping to achieve? Did they really think they'd have over 10,000 players within a week if it wasn't for the Game Awards? This whole thing reeks of mismanagement and hubris. It's incredible. He would then go on to say how proud he is of the journey of his team and that he had learned a lot throughout all of it. At the same time, though, you'd also find him on Twitter saying something that was very interesting. You see, someone would quote tweet the closure announcement of Highguard, saying, people don't praise failure, but it's the foundation of every success, nothing but love for Wildlight. To which someone would reply with, "It's just baffling to me they released the game in such a skeleton state and decided now's the time to add account levels and introduce some sort of skill tree system. It's crazy to see the parallels between this game failing and seeing Marathon come back after so many tests." This is when the studio head, Chad Grenier, would say, "When you're out of time and money, you have to release a game with the runway you have available and hope players will stick with you post-launch." Now that definitely didn't give off the same tone that his LinkedIn post did. Hell, I'm even baffled why you would want to even admit this, you know? You had close to 4 years of development.
Oh, there's a shock.
This was the best you could do? The more we learn about this game, the more we understand this was mismanagement. They were fully funded and got way too confident about that. But development and management issues aside, some people would spark up discussions about the art direction of this game and the missed potential. Many of the employees who worked on this game artistically would start posting much of the work on websites like ArtStation, showcasing it in their portfolio. One thing that people would find is this very interesting character concept, being absolutely baffled as to why this wasn't included in the game's release, instead
Yeah, it's
including
freaking awesome.
some way more boring designs. At the same time, the artist Kasaragul would make a very interesting long post about the art direction of this game and why it was baffling, how none of it really made sense, it didn't mesh well together. Some people also argued that because much of the game's art was outsourced to different studios and people outside of the studio itself, the outsourcing team as well as the art director failed to keep cohesion, which resulted in not just the gameplay itself feeling like some sort of Frankenstein creation, but also its entire art direction. The entire thing was mismanaged to hell from day one. It was a tragedy. And with that, I actually want to mention a quote from Gabe Newell. This is drawn from the article by Jeff Keighley detailing the development of Half-Life 2. The team at Valve wanted Gabe Newell to greenlight Half-Life 2's development. It was actually very hard to do that because their proof of concept just wasn't good enough for him for a while. Of course, there was the argument, well, why can't Gabe just finance it? I mean, come on, you know, like what's stopping him? He has the money for it. And this is when this paragraph comes along, saying, "True, but most game developers also aren't in Valve's position, where Newell has enough money to fund a game's development out of his pocket if he so pleases. So is it really fair to hold other developers to the same standards as Valve?" Ask Newell this question and he grows agitated. Any developer who bitches about, "Oh, our publisher cut off our money," or "the publisher made us ship the game early," doesn't get it, he says. That's the interesting problem you have to solve as a developer. If you don't, well, you'll be perpetually screwed. But how do you solve the problem? Newell cites the development of Counter-Strike, where a young college kid in Vancouver made a Half-Life add-on as a prime example. You bootstrap, Newell suggests. The Counter-Strike guys didn't have some sugar daddy show up and drop a huge wad of cash in their lap. You have to be creative. This was said back in 2002, and today in 2026, it could not ring more true. Concord had a sugar daddy. Their name was Sony. $400 million. Look where that got them. The game sucked. Period. You want funding? How about you make a game first, a proof of concept that's actually fun? When it comes to the world leaderboard of any percent speedruns of shutting down after release, Highguard now sits at 4th place behind the Culling 2, Concord, and Crucible at 45 days.
I mean, that is
Twitter
pretty
account
tough
totally
competition
explains
there.
a quote tweet Jeff Keighley's GIF saying, "In 48 hours I'll be accepting your apologies," saying, "I'm sorry, Jeff," to which Jeff would reply with a shocked image of that same
Now
grandpa in
that
the GIF. I mean, in the movie itself, he would
is
say
funny.
this, and then he would be proven wrong. So it was very ironic. At least he was playing into the joke. But some people would be very weird about this and would photograph Jeff on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles and say that this was him a day after Highguard.
Okay, yeah, that is cringe. Stalking someone in real life is fucking cringe. Don't do that.
Announced the studio shutting down. I don't know why you got to take a picture of him IRL for this, but what do I expect from people at this point? Some would even argue that Jeff actually needs to take a level of accountability for the game shutting down. But personally, I think if you have common sense, you'd understand that he actually did them a huge favor here, assuming he genuinely did this out of the goodness of his own heart. The game would have definitely launched with maybe like 10k concurrence instead of 100,000 on PC. Additionally, 2 million people tried it, and the majority didn't leave because the internet made them, okay? Paul Tassi makes a great point here. Marketing can only get you to try a game. It can't get you to stay on the game if it's not fun. And Highguard simply was not fun. It was weird. And at this point, it seems like every year
Well, League of Legends would disagree, but yeah, for the most part, that's true.
We're seeing yet another disaster story that is similar to Concord, a game that no one asked for, that had a big budget, that had very talented people working on it, and somehow, some way, it was worked on for years without anyone thinking, wait a second, are we really about to do this? I don't know, man. All I know is that the gaming industry is in a very rough spot right now. It's almost impossible to find a job. AI isn't even to blame for this. Executives have no idea what players actually want, and if they do, they're always late on it. And seeing that they never actually suffer the consequences directly, their employees do, they have no incentive to actually learn from their mistakes. If you want to make games, make them, but make something that people want to actually play. And don't ask for sugar daddy money. Make a playable game first, then pitch it, and then get your funding. Otherwise, you'll end up like Concord, like Highguard, and God knows whatever else is going to release soon that will face the same fate. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I really hope you enjoyed it. I love you so much platonically. I missed you. Make sure to check out my Stacked page if you want to see exclusive content of me with videos, both short and long, yapping. And I'll see you in the next video, whenever that is, hopefully soon. Take care and mwah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the story of Concord 2, aka Highguard. Industry never changes. Alright, so yeah, let's see. Anything else I can react to? Actually, I think I'll go ahead and BRB real quick. Don't worry, I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm back for a bit, but dinner's almost gonna be ready soon, so I don't know how. I'm gonna be reacting next. And maybe I'll do a Rob to me. One of those. Don't really know how much longer I'm gonna. Yeah, all right. I think I'll just yeah, I'll just play some music, honestly. Okay, back to this. Oh, hey, hey, deal with. Yeah, I can't read any of that. Sorry. That's but I made the audio. There we go. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Overclocked Remix has a shit ton of bangers. Really underappreciated music for streaming. I seriously need to check out the Command and Conquer series. Yeah, a lot of good shit about it. Dang it. Sorry guys, I got BRB again. Don't worry, I'll be back in a bit. Sorry, guys. I am back. Dinner was ready sooner than I thought it would be. Yeah, let's wrap up this sketch, and I think that'll be the stream for tonight. Oh, hey, Frizalga. Also, I need to download this song. I'll do it later. Oh, hey, Nora. Glad to see you on the stream. Alright. I need to work on those proportions a bit, but yeah, just normalize. Alright, so two sketches done, right? With that, I think I'm gonna go ahead and call it a stream since, like I said, I'm feeling really tired tonight. But I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I will see you all next time.